Hello, I'm Kate. I'm in Halifax. Our next section of our presentation focuses on how to improve the quality and utility of observational assessment and feedback. Effective observational assessment administration is important because the data quality, can be judged in several different ways, is essential for all assessment procedures in health professions. And in order for all learners to be treated fairly, educational feedback needs to be accurate and trustworthy. Some practical recommendations for giving good observational assessments are listed here. And just to go through a few of them, observational assessment should offer a broad range of clinical situations and procedures. The assessment should be short and focused. There should be sufficient time for assessment so that ratings are thoughtful and candid. And they shall be also recorded promptly, which helps prevent any distortion or memory loss from the observation. Being done by multiple raters helps balance the effects of inter-rater differences. Also, group review along these lines removes the responsibility from a single evaluator onto the group to make a general consensus and decision about a learner. Important to educate raters in regards to the assessment tools and ratings. It's also important to establish a meaning to the ratings. So what is marginal versus exemplary so that the learners and the educators are on the same page. Give faculty raters feedbacks because that's going to be important for them to understand where they fit and if their perceptions are in line with others. Supplement formal observational feedback with unobtrusive observations to obtain a better estimate of trainees' normal clinical behavior. And finally, formative assessments for teaching, learning, and feedback should be separate from assessments done for learner promotion or advancement. Reducing potential sources of bias is going to be very important in improving the quality of assessments. And one way we need to do this is to ensure that assessments are uniform, fair, and impartial. Decreasing ambiguity of clinical competencies to be observed by defining the specific clinical competencies to be assessed during the clinical placement. Looking at faculty training, which includes training the faculty prior to engaging in clinical placements to ensure that they are on the same page in what needs to be assessed and observed, as well as what the standard of performances are. This is proposed to improve rating accuracy in health professions education, but unfortunately is rarely done. It's important to ensure regular and multiple direct observations over a period of time to obtain information from multiple sources in specific clinical settings. These are things like multi-source feedback. It's important to acknowledge that even seasoned preceptors can make mistakes or skewed observations and have their own biases that they bring when assessing learners. And finally, recognizing that clinical placements are important and so the faculty work should be adjusted such that they have the time and energy in order to do good assessments and provide good feedback to learners. Sort of on this note of feedback, observational assessment as an assessment strategy is only as good as the feedback that is provided to learners. Feedback is defined as the specific information about the comparison of a trainee's observed performance and the standard, given with the intent to improve the trainee's performance. In healthcare professions, it has been called an absolute necessity, and unfortunately has been shown to not be done enough. Unfortunately, much of the feedback that we see, at least I have personally, looks something like this, which is often called a less polite version of the poo sandwich. Though this framework often makes the giver of negative and constructive feedback more comfortable, in many important learning points can be diluted and often lost because the constructive feedback is just piled and mixed in with all these other sort of compliments. But as a giver of feedback, as a preceptor, it's integral to remember that feedback, both positive and negative, is part of instruction and assessment. Good feedback, whether comfortable or not for the preceptor, is critical because it is a powerful teaching strategy that can be used in assessments for, as, and of learning. Feedback has been shown to enhance learning in 3 ways, which include informing the learner of their progress, identifying learning needs, as well as motivating the learner to engage in activities. So since feedback is so important in an observational assessment, the question then becomes, how do we give good feedback? Now, this has been covered by other groups. We're just going to very briefly go over it. There are a number of different strategies that can be used to give good and useful feedback. These are just some general tips that have come up. Firstly, that feedback is stronger if it's based off direct observation rather than what's being heard down the grapevine, 3rd, 4th, or 5th line. In order to create a supportive environment, reserving a specific time, which certainly can be difficult in a clinical setting with no interruptions, as well as giving the feedback in a private area so that the learner feels comfortable, so the preceptor feels comfortable without potential prying ears. As mentioned earlier, regular feedback to create multiple data points is important to get a good, well-rounded assessment of the learner. And it makes the learner and preceptor more comfortable because they're more used to receiving and giving feedback. So it doesn't seem as such a high stakes type assessment. Feedback needs to be constructive. Preceptors need to provide areas of growth. An unfortunate phenomenon is something called vanishing feedback, which is where preceptors who lack the skills to give negative feedback don't give any at all because they don't feel comfortable. This is a huge learning opportunity that is missed and needs to be rectified. Choosing 2 to 3 succinct points to discuss, and then developing strategies to improve rather than a barrage of things that need to be done. And finally, checking in with the learner after the feedback's been given to understand that to confirm that they understand the feedback and also what the strategies are for them to achieve where they need to get to. Finally, our next and final section is on assessment tools. This is a collection of some of the observational assessments that have or are used in our personal education. So first up, we have the O score, which is used in my residency program. It stands for Ottawa Surgical Competency Operating Room Evaluation, and it was actually developed here in Ottawa. This is a formative assessment tool to assess technical proficiency of surgical residents using behavioral anchors. Now, behavioral anchors are not something we see too commonly, and they are core competencies associated with the mastery of a procedure. They're defined as performance capabilities needed to demonstrate knowledge, skill, and ability acquisition. This score has been validated and found to be accurate and reliable in surgical training. So this is an example of one of our evaluations. You can see here the behavioral anchors are a bit different under the scale section, and they range from I had to prompt occasionally or I only need to be in the room just in case. This has replaced the traditional scoring on a 5-point scale, which is slightly subjective based on what the learner's perception of a 3 or 4 is, and as well as the preceptors. Another way that the O score has reduced bias is because it's reduced some of the pressure preceptors feel to avoid scoring low. So often there's a pressure to score a 3, 4, or 5 on 5, but by using these anchors, it's more easy to give a learner a 1 or a 2 if that's really where they were, because the descriptions are quite clear. The nature of these assessments as well also requires that the learner be present and is part of the feedback, which is going to increase the learning opportunities. And like any assessment, it's not without its areas of growth, namely in this case, the subjectivity of having only one assessor who has not necessarily received specific assessment training. Additionally, the O score does not directly include a self-reflection component, which has been shown to improve and increase learning. But overall, since implemented about a year and a half ago, the O score has been met with much positive feedback, and something we're certainly going to consider or planning to keep using. I will pass it next over to Salma.